Welcome to the Think Christian podcast, where we talk about faith and pop culture because there's no such thing as secular. I'm Josh Larson, ready for the final episode in our Best of 2024 series. And to my mind, at least, we saved the best for last. We're going to talk movies. I am a movie guy first, so I'm extremely excited to bring on Roslyn Hernandez and J.R. Forasteros. We're going to talk about, some gossipy Catholic priests, a former Marine who is up against corrupt cops, and whatever it is that Demi Moore becomes by the end of The Substance. Buckle up for that one. Okay, are you ready? Let's talk the best movies of 2024. It's time to talk movies as part of our Best of 2024 podcast series. And I love the picks that J.R. Forasteros and Roslyn Hernandez brought to discuss today. I've got one that I'm going to throw in to the mix as well. Before we get to those titles, I do have a bigger picture question for the two of you. I'm curious to hear what kind of movie year 2024 was for you both. I mean, how did you do movies last year? Did you mostly see them in theaters? Was it a lot of on the couch via streaming? Heaven forbid, did you watch movies on your phones? I do feel like this landscape is continually shifting, what a movie is and how we watch them. So I'm always curious to hear from people about this. What did that look like for you, Roslyn, in 2024?
Well, I'm one of those people that didn't watch movies on her phone, but I also did try to go to the movie theaters to watch. This is always the best experience, and I do try to make time for that. But I also do just watch a lot of movies and television just from my couch on the phone.
All right. So give me a sense of that on the phone. Is it like a time thing, or is it a title thing where you're like, I think I can get this on a phone. How does that decision process work? Or is it more impulsive?
I think it might be more impulsive. I think there are certainly titles, if they look either from a director that I really like, if the cinematography looks like it would really make a difference if it was in a theater. But yeah, I think it's mostly about time. I don't have a lot of time to get out to the theater. And I do have a projector at my house, but sometimes it's just like setting it up and all of that.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, I get that. All right. How about you, JR?
I have the Movie Pass. I don't know if we're allowed to shout out brands here, but it's AMC. And I live 10 minutes from an AMC theater, which in Texas is like saying it's right around the corner. Mm-hmm. And so I go to the movies as much as I can. And this year, 2024, I made a commitment to try to see 365 movies, 366 because it was a leap year.
Whoa.
And I did it.
Whoa.
So I would still say most of them were on my TV. And I also decided legitimately I'm never going to do that again because I watched so much content instead of like what I felt were really good films. Because I would run out of stuff that I was looking forward to seeing. And then I would just, get on Amazon Prime or Netflix or Hulu and find some algorithm produced wannabe blockbuster. And I'd watch it and I would get done with it and be like, ugh.
Just trying to make that count? Was that part
of
it?
Okay. Again, just to see if I could do it. And, And so anytime I could, I would try to go to the movies, especially, I'm a horror fan and I love the really silly B horror stuff, things that I know are not going to be as good. And watching those even in a theater with like 7 other people that are there at 9:30 on a weeknight to watch some ridiculous movie that is going to be in the theaters for 5 days, there's still something cool about it. Like it's still great. If it's a hidden treasure, it's something you discovered together. If it's a stinker, you survive it together. And there's still just for me, nothing like a theatrical experience. As much as possible, I still tried to go to the movie theater, capitalizing on that Movie Pass.
Definitely helps. And the location. If you can like hop in the car maybe a little bit before start time and miss most of the previews. I used to have that when we were in the suburbs scenario where I had it timed from the house to the seat was pretty much like the preview window. So
that
makes
I know right when Nicole's going to start, so I don't miss her. And then
can't miss that. All right, well, let's get to our picks for our favorite movies or some of our favorite movies of last year. And JR, I didn't want to scare listeners off right away, so we're going to wait to get to The Substance and start with Roslyn's
Totally
pick,
fair.
all right? All right, good. Roslyn, you wanted to talk about Rebel Ridge, which is a more conventional effort. I think we can say it's a cop thriller, but it's challenging in its own way, I would say. This one streamed on Netflix. Speaking of the couch, it stars Aaron Pierre as Terry, a former Marine who is stopped by police in a small Louisiana town. This is while he has a whole bunch of cash on him because he's en route to bail out his cousin. The cop seize the money illegally, and let's just say things escalate from there. So tell me, Roslyn, why Rebel Ridge struck a chord with you.
I think this struck a chord with a lot of people. It has a really great reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. And one of the things that really struck me was the sense of justice that this film really tries to portray. And it's kind of like a David and Goliath story. And I think that a lot of people root for the underdog here, and especially because of all the illegal business that the police force is involved in here. And so for me, I think I've also been thinking about institutions and the corruption of institutions, which I kind of see as a theme in these films that we're going to talk about today, and just about like truth telling and truth hiding and truth finding. And so for me, this was one of those films that, even though it was created to be an action blockbuster kind of film, it really teaches the audience something that is happening. It brings something to the forefront of, hey, this stuff happens. This stuff isn't completely legal. This person, Terry, the character in the film, got to do something about it. But the truth is that not many people get to do that. Not many people get the kind of help that he gets. And not many people have the skills that he has.
And he still paid a price to get even the results he got, which I would argue are not it's not a Hollywood happy ending. So yeah, even given that he quote unquote wins, it's not a complete victory. He still has to pay a pretty steep price for even what he's able to accomplish.
Yeah, there's a lot of loss here throughout this process, even as he will in some ways get the upper hand, even though the odds are stacked against him. You mentioned sort of the thoughtfulness that is brought to this genre, Roslyn. I think that's what the writer-director Jeremy Saulnier is kind of known for. Other films of his are Blue Ruin and Green Room, and there's extra substance he brings, extra style too. There's sort of a kick that his movies have, these genre movies, and part of what transfixed me, though, was Aaron Pierre in this lead performance. This righteous action hero who's trying the best as he can in this situation. I think we can say to maybe not turn the other cheek totally, but certainly not seek an eye for an eye. And so what was interesting to me was how Rebel Ridge reconsidered these ideas, as you said, of justice, violence, resistance, revenge. And these are various biblical principles, things that are discussed often in the Bible, both Old and New Testament. They're being brought to bear here in this real world situation, but also this genre situation. You mentioned David and Goliath, Roslyn, how you see that playing out in this dynamic.
There's always the sense of the stories of the underdogs that do really great with all kinds of audiences. And I think for me, a piece that also comes in here that has to do with that kind of dynamic is that Terry is a Black man in America, and this happens in the South. And so something that connects with this that I really enjoyed was that Stephen King called it a thinking man's Rambo. And there's no other way Terry could have done this. He doesn't have the luxury to be impulsive. He's had to be methodical. He's had to be discerning. He has the discipline that he learned in the military, in the Marines, but also he doesn't have the luxury to act out of impulse. And that's something that is another part to the story of the reality that people face in our country, that there is racism and there is injustice and there's systemic oppression against people of color, and particularly Black men. And so I think that in our country, stories of David and Goliath are often men of color facing systemic injustice.
Yeah, the odds are stacked against him because of that, even more so than they would be if he wasn't a Black man. And I like how the movie touches on that lightly and doesn't necessarily shove it in the forefront, yet it's present in every scene, just under the surface, particularly in the way he knows how he has to step lightly in ways that others probably don't. So it's there in the performance. It's also there in the screenwriting, and it's crucial to this story. I found this movie, Jared, I'm curious because you said you wanted to point out that there are costs here and not everything goes smoothly for him. Nevertheless, I found this this, and maybe, Roslyn, this is why it resonated with the audience so much, deeply cathartic. This movie, in a year where there's been so much frustration on issues like these, then you get this movie where it's like, but here's this one guy who maybe doesn't change the system, to your point, Roslyn, but finds a way to escape it with marks, with scars, but still escape it. And there was just something, without it being complete fantasy, deeply cathartic to me about Rebel Ridge. Did you feel that at all, JR?
I don't know if I thought it was cathartic exactly. And maybe that's because I watched it very shortly after I finished the second season of Reacher on Amazon Prime. And so I didn't go thinking Man's Rambo, apologies, Stephen King. I did, oh, this is Blackjack Reacher, and watching them next to each other like that, which they're both sort of like a, former military guy out on his own, not trying to ride on his laurels or something like that, just gets mixed up in some small town nonsense and they make a huge mistake by taking him off. And yeah, I think that was what highlighted so much how all of the race issues for me, because in Reacher, he's this like 6'5", 300 pounds of pure muscle white dude. And he does get away with and get to do a lot more and takes a lot more shortcuts than are available to the character in Rebel Ridge. And so, yeah, I don't know if I would say it was cathartic as much as I just think it's interesting that this is the kind of crime dramas that we're getting more of now that we're a couple of years out from George Floyd, right? Where I think even the propaganda stuff, like The Rookie or a lot of the detective procedurals, have a lot more police corruption, a lot more surfaced on the shows, and the characters are having to deal with that a lot more. And so maybe that's why I don't find it cathartic, because I'm still waiting for someone to go, okay, so we think we've got some solutions here now. I'm glad art is trying to process it, but I do want to see more of it seep into our real world and start having some impact on how our systems hold the powerful to account.
Yeah, the systemic issues are still there at the end of Rebel Ridge, without a doubt. The last thing, at least I want to say about it, is it does have one of the great lines of 2024, which I'm just paraphrasing here, but at one point when Terry asks one of the cops he's subdued, did I put too much sauce on that? They push him to a point and it's like, okay, things are going to go down now. I found that line cathartic, so I will say that. Okay.
Amazing.
Here we go, JR, the substance. Let's start this. I had a little challenge for you I wanted to throw out. For listeners who don't know much about this movie, can you, without spoilers, sum up the substance in, I'll give you about 20 seconds.
I'm going to try to do it real quick.
Okay.
A Jekyll and Hyde film about female beauty standards.
Look at you. Look at you. I
Very
mean, there
nice.
you go. Roslyn, would you say, as the person who's seen it most recently, would you say that that captures it? What else should people know plot-wise?
Are you asking me or JR?
A Cronenberg-esque Jekyll and Hyde story about female beauty standards.
Yeah. Do you think he got it, Roslyn? What do people know about Demi Moore, at least? We should tell them who she plays.
Okay, yes. Demi Moore plays Elizabeth Sparkle, a personality, an actress.
Like a Jane
celebrity,
Fonda, right?
Like a Jane Fonda
exercise celebrity, yep.
Right. Who caves to the beauty standards of the industry, much to her demise.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Essentially by being approached with this mysterious substance material that she needs to inject that has some side effects. Let's say that. So JR, please
very
tell
little
me.
Instructions.
Yeah, very literal instructions in bold print. That was kind of helpful, but still, I don't know if I could have followed through on everything. Yeah. I would have messed that up. But this is a wild movie, as we're hinting at. It definitely touches on these themes, and I appreciated it myself. It did not make my top 10 list. There are moments, though, that made my scenes of the year consideration, because it's very bold, I think, and it's got its own vision and it commits to it. JR, this was one of your favorite of the year, so tell us why.
First of all, I just love a very well-made horror film. And this is a very well-made horror film. To your point, Josh, it commits to the bit. And the third act is a completely unpredictable, totally insane thrill ride. We saw this in a packed theater opening weekend. It was one of those theaters that was noisy because everyone was so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that was just so fun to experience this collective shock and awe of what we are seeing. And a film that manages to do that, that gives you something that is totally unpredictable and yet in hindsight feels inevitable, it's a difficult thing to do. And French director Farge, do you know how you pronounce her name?
Coralie Farge, I think it is.
Okay. This is only her second film. Her first one, Revenge, a rape revenge film that, again, this is a genre that is well trod in the horror industry and is generally rightly vilified for being a just disgusting genre of film. And she managed to make a shockingly feminist take on the rape revenge movie. And so I wasn't surprised that Substance was so smart, but goodness gracious, the costuming, the set design, the sound design, even in that very first opening shot of the egg being injected with the substance and then splitting into two yolks, the sound was so icky.
Yeah.
It's just kind of let you know what you're in for. The performances across the board were incredible. The direction, I mean, again, I'm sure we will mention the shrimp scene, which barely even counts as plot and yet was like the grossest, craziest shot of the movie. And nothing was even happening that was unusual. It was just in the way it was filmed and performed. Everything about this. And then again, thematically, this film, I've seen a bunch of people complain that it's not subtle. And I'm like, first of all, welcome to body horror. It's like the least subtle genre that has ever existed. Two, we tried being subtle about feminism for a lot of years and it hasn't caught on. So maybe it's time for blunt force trauma. Like, I don't know what it will take, but I will say I've watched it, I think 3 or 4 times now. And once you've seen it, it actually, I think, becomes more of a comedy. Like, this movie is very, very, very funny. It's just so shocking the first time around that it's hard to laugh because of that. Did either of you find yourselves enjoying parts of it, even as you were horrified?
I think you do get to a point of laughter, even before you might recognize the humor going on, though. Yeah, I saw that was there, but it's just one of these experiences that you need to express something at a certain point because it just keeps escalating. Roslyn, what was your laughter to scream ratio, if we want to put it that way?
I've only seen it once so far, and I'm
who's going to watch this twice? Come on. Oh boy, JR's raised his hand.
I keep showing it to people. They're like, oh, I heard that movie's good. I'm like, let's watch party. Let's go.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of screaming for me. There was a lot of shocked silence and no words. The woman was too stunned to speak. That's what was happening.
Did you watch it alone? Can I ask that?
I did. I watched it alone, but it was also very sad. There was a lot of sadness in there. And my mind also immediately went to Jekyll and Hyde. But in this horror genre, I think there are different levels of horror happening. Body horror happening there. There is, of course, the gore, the disfiguration, all of that. But there's also the layer where the feminist comes in, right? Of the horror of being a woman in a world and in a culture, society that objectifies women's bodies. And there are even horrific images that have nothing to do with the disfigurement of the body, where it's just horrific to think of yourself as a person being scrutinized in that way. Like that part where Sue's performing and then something pops out of like her hip and then they like magnify her butt, like, and they're like watching it frame by. That was horrifying. And not just like so many other things that, the way that Elizabeth hears the executive talking about her, the reality of horror that women experience every day.
It's not that exaggerated, those scenes.
Not.
Right? And Sue, we should say, is this doppelganger. This isn't really giving too much away, but that becomes part of the substance process, is this variation of Elizabeth. And, sadness, I think, is right, Roslyn, because the scene that I actually considered when on Film Spotting, we do our, scenes of the year, different categories. And for my favorite actual scene of the year, I didn't end up going with it, but I considered the moment in this movie where Elizabeth, the Demi Moore character, is getting ready to go out on a date. And it's this extended sequence of her before the mirror, and she reconsiders what she's wearing, how her hair is, her makeup she does differently. She's wiping it off and gets increasingly violent on herself. And all of this is prompted because she has this doppelganger, this younger version of herself in her mind. And she's feeling threatened by that. She's lost her own confidence, even as a beautiful woman. Just the fact that there's a younger version is what has crippled her. And there's a deep sadness in that scene. I think it's, the best scene Demi Moore has in terms of acting. And it's hitting at something there that sometimes, for me at least, the rest of the movie is more into some exaggerated versions of things. And that one gets at a real personal sadness and distress and despair that touches on some of the things you're talking about. JR, I want to run something by you for listeners to the Think Christian podcast, or like, why are they bothering talking about this movie on here? Because you mentioned body horror and how it may not be subtle. You don't look for subtlety. One reason that I like the genre, despite the challenging material, is because I do think it can be a malleable metaphor for so many things when you get into body horror. And maybe none of them are, subtle, but they can stand in for certain things. And when I wrote about the genre in my book on Christianity and horror, Fear Not, I talked about it being exploring our fear of our own mortality, the breakdown of our bodies. And this is something I think a fear that Christianity in particular recognizes, because Christianity is a bodily religion, right? We were created good in these corporeal bodies. And the cost of the fall, one of the costs is that our bodies decay, our bodies age, we die. And of course, the hope of the gospel is that there's something beyond that. But sometimes these horror movies, these body horror movies, sit in that current reality, the fallen reality. So if I apply that to the substance, this is maybe about what happens when we negate that hope as these broken bodies and try to stave off the decay on our own, in our own power, with our own invention. And the substance explores how maybe this pressure is unique or amplified for women, maybe doubly amplified for a woman in the entertainment industry. But this urge that we all have, I think, to stay young, to keep death away, to keep the years away, and how that might not go well. Is that enough of a sales pitch, JR, for why maybe a Think Christian listener might be interested in this movie?
I think absolutely so. And I mean, again, we won't do spoilers, but we'll say there is also an old body in the substance, an older body than Demi Moore's body, which, by the way, is a 64-year-old body playing a 50-year-old body, which is insane in and of itself. But there is an even older, much older body in the substance that part of the discourse around that was this hag exploitation, which is this thing is scary because it's old, and old equals scary, right? And I think that Farge was really subverting that because of exactly what you're saying, right? There ought not be anything undignified and certainly not terrifying about aging. There was a time when our cultures revered the gray-headed and the elderly and put them in a place of honor and prominence in our culture. And of course, we don't do that anymore because we have idolized youth. And so I think it matters that at the heart of Christian religion is body horror, a mutilated body on a cross. My favorite gospel is John because he so often mixes the metaphorical and the literal into the single scene. And one of those places is the famous thing of doubting Thomas, right? Where he asked the resurrected Jesus to prove, not that he's really real, but to prove that he's really Jesus. Right? And Jesus does that by saying, well, enter into my body, right? Like, here's the hole, go ahead and poke your finger in, Thomas. And like every time we tell that story, we're like, like that's such a gross, horrific story. And yet we talk about Jesus's body being broken open. We celebrate that every time we celebrate communion. And it's the very breaking open of his body that allows us to enter in and become part of his body. We become members of his body. So there's this horror at the heart of our faith, which is why the Romans thought we were so weird in the first few hundred years of our religion, right? They were like, what are those guys talking about? Like, they're such freaks. I never tell someone they should watch a body horror movie. I'm like, listen, if it's not for you, it's not for you.
Sure.
This is a movie where I make an exception because I think the themes are so strong and so interesting that I think the juice is worth the squeeze. And I have told a lot of people who normally would not be into a horror film, I think you might be glad you watched this movie. I won't say you'll enjoy it because, I don't know, mileage may vary on enjoying, right? But I think, man, it made me feel a lot of things that I think were important to feel.
That is a strong recommendation. Any last substance thoughts, Roslyn, before we move on?
Are you going to say something, JR?
Oh, I had one other little thing I wanted to say, but please.
Taking it a little bit out of the physical, but also connected to it, the substance really made me think about psychoanalysis and archetypal work. And that's something that I have been kind of reading about and kind of doing even some of that work myself. It's a story that is a metaphor, right? Of like the fragmentation of the self and the shadow aspects that we create because we're seeking to reach perfection or seeking to project a perfected image. And it also connects to even Conclave and Rebel Ridge because there's these institutions or these aspects of ourselves, these projections that we seek to portray as perfect. And in doing so, we hide aspects and we shame parts of ourselves. We become fragmented and we create monsters out of something that we really should integrate, that we can accept, acknowledge, forgive, and not shame, and become a whole, healthy self. But because we shame parts of who we are or things that we have done, we create this darkness and this like really unattainable projection that is so hard to keep up.
Well, and to your point about institutions, I think there is that element of the substance when we see Sue, the younger version, trying to make her own way through the industry. Even though she's this supposedly perfect, she has the same scrutiny as you were describing, Roslyn. And so it is a systemic issue, these beauty standards or image standards that are put in place. What was the last thing you wanted to mention, Jer?
I haven't seen anyone talking about this, and so I just wanted to shout out in a film that is largely not subtle in great ways. One little note that I just wanted to say that I appreciated was that Dennis Quaid, who plays the executive who is in charge of marginalizing Elizabeth and hiring Sue and all of this.
Messy shrimp eater, Dennis Quaid.
Yeah. I don't know about y'all, but I, and most of the people I've talked to, we kept waiting for him to pull like a Matt Lauer or a Harvey Weinstein and do something explicitly sexual towards Elizabeth or towards Sue. And I think there were so many moments where I was like, oh, now it's about to happen. Now this is where it's going to happen. And it never did. And there's even a moment where, as a weird aside that doesn't even make any sense, as he's like blathering, which he does in every scene he's in, he goes, "Oh, I love my wife." And then just walks off screen.
That's right.
And I appreciated that because he's clearly a misogynist, right? He is clearly one of the main benefiters from and architects of this system that is exploiting and sexualizing Elizabeth and Sue. And yet he never personally does anything that we would say like crosses the line, that he's not going to get Me Too'd, at least from what we see in this film, right? And I think that's important because so often when it comes to bigotry, whether that's racism or, homophobia or misogyny, people say, oh, I can't be racist, I have a black friend, or, oh, I'm not a misogynist, I love my wife or I love my daughters or whatever. And I liked that. This film could have showed us a sleazy, abusive executive and we would have believed it. And we would have been like, yeah, that's just part of, everything's turned to 11, that's turned to 11. This was a place where it actually pulled back and showed some restraint. I actually thought made the message even more compelling because it said, this is not just a thing that people who like actively abuse women have a problem with. This is a systemic issue that anyone who's a part of it is culpable. And again, I thought that was like a very subtle part of the film for a film that's not very subtle. And maybe that's why it doesn't get talked about very much. But I saw that and I loved it. So I just wanted to shout that out.
And I think that adds to the fear because those moments, it's always the tension of, oh, is this going to happen? Or what's going to happen? Or is this when it happens? It adds to the fear of being a female in those kinds of environments, being a woman.
Lots of good stuff on the substance. We've got one more movie to discuss, and that is Conclave. This is the Vatican set drama. It's basically imagines what might go on behind the scenes during the process to select a new pope, just outside of my top 10 films of 2024. But I loved it. Something of a surprise to me when I heard about this. I thought, oh, it's going to be a little stiff, kind of boring, but I was surprised.
Or I thought it was going to be like sensationalist, like there's some kind of deep conspiracy, or we're going to go Da Vinci Cody.
Yeah. Could have gone that direction for sure.
Yeah. And it didn't do that either.
No, it's really fascinating how it manages to be, there's some weighty stuff here for sure, but it's also very exciting, like a political thriller. There's courtroom style intrigue, kind of a potboiler, right? It looks like you guys had a similar reaction, but let me give a little plot here and then I'll get your responses. Ralph Fiennes is the star as Cardinal Lawrence. He's the dean of the College of Cardinals. So basically, Lawrence is responsible for sequestering these colleagues, and he has to oversee this elaborate, very ostentatious, and kind of politically tricky voting process. So were you guys surprised? Roslyn, were you surprised at how entertaining this movie was compared to maybe expectations you had?
Having read about or watched other shows where Pope history or the church's history is involved, I wasn't super surprised. I kind of knew there was always some stuff going on with the Catholic Church in terms of like the people that sit at power. But it was really interesting to see the dynamics between all of these men and even the women who were there, especially because of power, but also because of fear and because of passion and the search for doing the right thing. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I also didn't think it was going to be as action-packed, or I'm not sure how to even say
No, I mean, that's a good phrase, even though there's not like these these cardinals aren't punching each other. So,
No.
but it feels like that could break out at any moment, maybe.
Yeah.
What was your impression, JR, compared to your expectations?
I think we've all lived through 2 Pope selections, right? Benedict and Francis. And so I'll admit, I was just kind of like, let me know when there's white smoke, or whichever smoke is the good smoke, right? The we got us a Pope smoke. I didn't really pay a lot of attention. I didn't even, read up on who are our leader candidates. Because again, I'm not Catholic, and I was like, well, we'll just find out. And again, as I already mentioned, I kind of kept waiting for it to go somewhere salacious. There's going to be some kind of big secret revealed. And the several times that something like that was hinted at, when what was being hinted at was revealed in the film, it was much more of a grounded, believable issue. It wasn't some kind of, again, like a Dan Brown type conspiracy thing, maybe again, that's because I watch too many horror movies where half the cardinals are always, demon possessed or whatever. But it was a grounded, thrilling political drama. And I wonder how folks who are not religious would relate to this film, because I felt like so much of the dialogue felt very inside baseball to me, in terms of who's divided by what issues. And I mean, understanding that in any large group, there's going to be people who are more interested in conserving traditions and people who are more interested in changing to accommodate the times. But beyond that, would they understand why the Latin American cardinal is the one that is leading this conservative contingent? Or what are we talking about going back to Vatican II and all this, why is it a big deal that the African guy, I don't know. I followed well enough to have a great time with it. And like you, it ended up just outside my top 10. It was terrific.
Yeah, there is a lot of that sort of talk. I think beyond the terminology stuff, though, I think there's some theological richness as well that I don't know how, non-religious audiences might have taken that. I thought it was absolutely a strength, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on one aspect of that. There's a point here where finds Cardinal Lawrence, he gives a homily, and in it he warns his colleagues against placing too much importance on theological certainty, let's say, in their deliberations over who should be the new pope.
If there was only certainty and no doubt, there would be no mystery, and therefore no need for faith.
And this struck a chord with a TC writer, Zachary Lee, who wrote a post for us about it called The Sin of Certainty. So I'm just going to read a little bit of that and then get your guys' thoughts. Here's Zachary. Lawrence argues that living out one's faith genuinely is a messy thing. We often swing between states of belief and disbelief. Rather than welcome those with questions, the church sometimes ostracizes them for fear that such mindsets will spread, an act that ironically keeps people away from the very community that they may need. Lawrence ultimately urges the cardinals to embrace a faith that has room for uncertainty. If there was only certainty and no doubt, there would be no mystery, he tells them, and therefore no need for faith. So I would like to hear what you two kind of think about this discussion of certainty in the film, or maybe there's other, theological elements at play in Conclave you wanted to touch on. But what would you say, Roslyn?
Yeah, I mean, I love mystery. And I think it is, as someone who has been in a theological journey and who finds myself more in the mystical space of Christianity, mystery is something that I feel very comfortable with, and even I'm grateful for. It's something that brings us awe, something that brings us joy. Being able to sit in something that we're not able to understand and still be present in those spaces and in those moments feels like communion with God, right? Like we are in God's presence and can never really fully understand who God is, and that's okay. That's what we've been created for, to be in presence and communion with God and not to pretend to understand God and all of God's mysteries. And so there's a bit of this dynamic, right, of Lawrence saying, let's embrace the mystery. There is doubt also because there are several candidates that are there to be Pope who also have doubts themselves, or even the Pope who had doubts before he passed. And so I think that certainty is something that really steals a lot from us, and also related to fear, the fear of not knowing, the fear of not being correct. But there's something that was so beautiful in this film that ties back to the other films, which is confession and truth-telling. There is not a single mystery in this film that isn't revealed in the end. Everything that gets hinted at eventually gets revealed. And it doesn't have to be, you know, as JR mentioned, something that is crazy. It was pretty grounded, but also everyone eventually tells the truth about their wrongs that they have done or have happened. But also because they tell the truth, because they bring those things to light, they're able to get integrated and healed. And even Lauren says, you know, I hope that, paraphrasing, we find someone who accepts his sins, asks for forgiveness, and is able to move on. And so this is, I think for me, a great part of this film was how people are able to confess, to bring things to light and move on, and eventually all work towards the same thing, the same goal.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that there is a pattern of truth-telling throughout, which is something that's kind of special about Conclave. Where are you at with this, JR?
I read this film as aspirational. You know, we're in as we've already talked about, we're in a season where institutions seem eviler than ever. And I don't know that matters whether you're talking about the elections. I mean, this came out right during an election cycle, right?
Yeah.
We have multiple, I mean, again, the Catholic Church itself is an institution that has been revealed to have some pretty deep rot in the last couple of decades. Same thing has happened with a number of evangelical institutions. Leader after leader after leader has been revealed to be not who we thought they were. And so there was one moment in the movie where in the middle of all of the politicking, Father Lawrence goes, but like, wait, we're all like seeking God's will on this, right? Like this is, and someone's like, oh, you're so cute, you know? And there is that feeling, right? Like, wait a second, isn't the church meant to be above this? Isn't the church meant to be different from all of this? And in this particular film, the way that it all unfolds, we are invited to believe that God is working in this powerful and mysterious way, which is why, again, I say I think maybe that's aspirational, because we want to hope that as we try to remain humble and try to trust in the divine mystery that we don't understand, that ultimately good will prevail, that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, since we're recording this on MLK Day, right? This film believes that, right? And this film exhibits that. And so I love it as an act of sort of prophetic hope there, you know, that even in the minutia of essentially board meetings, right? Even in the conclaves of the church, God can still get things done, even if it is in a perhaps like backwards or slow or convoluted way. The bureaucracy is not enough to stop the Holy Spirit. And so I appreciated that hope. It was definitely a message that I needed to be reminded of, you know, in this season.
Yeah, aspirational. I think that's a good way to describe it. It didn't strike me that way maybe in the moment, but I think you're right. Looking back at where things end up and the truth telling that's involved as well that you mentioned, Roslyn. Well, good stuff. Before I let you go, you know, with these episodes, I've been asking everyone to give me a pick beyond the main topic, beyond the main category we've been discussing. So since we covered movies in depth, I want to hear from the two of you, you know, TV show or maybe an album or even a song from 2024. Is there a pick in another category, Roslyn, you wanted to call out here?
Yes, probably a new season came out last year, but I got to watch it for the first time last year, and that's Dark Winds.
Oh.
It's a show about, yeah, yes, it's really good. It's a show about police officers on the Navajo reservation. I watched the first 2 seasons on Netflix. I watch a lot of stuff on Netflix, so that's where most of my recommendations come from. But also Resball, which is a film, but also with one of the actors from Dark Winds, also a really great film about Indigenous folks.
Excellent. So Netflix, yeah, that one got by me, and I'm looking here. There's going to be a season 3 in March. So yeah, if you wanted to catch up with that, maybe do that viewing now on the first 2 seasons and be ready for season 3. JR, what do you got for us?
I don't think this is a shocking pick, but Apple Plus's show Shrinking has just finished its 2nd season and remains really delightful. It's a show about unhealthy therapists, and it is a show where everyone is trying their best and everyone is trying to grow, and most of them manage to do that sort of despite themselves and through the power of community and healing and sometimes even therapy. And so again, it is a profoundly optimistic show. If you liked Ted Lasso, you'll probably really enjoy Shrinking. It's got Harrison Ford at his grumpiest and Jason Segel as his like plucky mentor. It's really good. It consistently leaves me feeling, again, hopeful. And I think that's a good thing to feel these days.
Nice. We did just publish a post on Shrinking Season 2 at thinkchristian.net. BJ Krug wrote that one, Shrinking and the Sermon on the Mount. So yeah, check that out if you've been watching it, or bookmark it for after you finish Season 2. All right. Well, thank you both. We are moving quickly ahead into 2025. So this year, if folks want to follow you for any podcasts, any writing, anything else you're up to, where is the best place for them to do that, Roslyn?
You can follow me on Instagram still. I'm not sure how I feel about Instagram.
Okay. I was going to ask what's behind the pause there. So you're there now, but may not be for much longer. I get it. Yes. Trust me, I get it. What's your username there for now?
It's Roslyn MH.
Okay. All right. Well, Thanks for that. How about you, JR? Where can folks find you in 25?
I'm mainly going to be hanging out on Substack and Blue Sky. I'm still on Facebook, Insta, Threads, but yeah, probably not much longer. So going to be hanging out on Blue Sky and mainly on Substack, which is where I do my newsletter. So anything I don't write for TC or Sojourners probably is going to show up on my Substack there. So JR Forasteros and any of those spaces, you'll find me.
There you go. All right. Thanks again to both of you. And yeah, wherever you end up social media wise, hopefully we'll have you back on the TC podcast later this year. So if you're going to plan a triple feature based on our picks, I would say start with Conclave, get drawn in by that church drama, and then give The Substance a try. If you make it through it, you can reward yourself with the action thriller Rebel Ridge. Let me know how that goes. You can connect with us on social media. These days, probably the best place is Instagram. You'll find clips there of these episodes, as well as posts and videos drawn from the articles that we publish over at thinkchristian.net. If you'd like to email us, you can always do that. Send those notes to tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net. Now, on our next show, we are going to leave 2024 behind, but we're still going to look to the past. With the passing of David Lynch on January 16, one of the most original film and TV directors we've ever had, we're going to discuss his acclaimed 1990 television series, Twin Peaks. Now, if, like me, for some reason you never watched the show, I don't know how that happened with me, but it's the truth. This is your chance, as it's going to be for me, to catch up with it. And you can start now. You'll be ready for our discussion on the TC podcast. Until then, I would encourage you to check out Joe George's memorial piece on David Lynch, which we already have up on the website. So you can find that at thinkchristian.net. Now, if you don't want to miss out on any articles like that, there's an easy thing to do. Just subscribe to receive our emails. You can do that at thinkchristian.net/subscribe. The TC podcast is a listener and donor supported production of Reframe Ministries, a family of programs designed to help you see your whole life reframed by God's gospel story. Visit reframeministries.org for more info. Our audio engineer and post-production supervisor is John Reeder, and I'm Josh Larson. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to consider how another corner of our pop culture fandom connects with our faith.